Just like to begin with a little public service announcement. Somebody asked me a very poignant question this morning. It said, what was Mac Brown thinking when on 3rd and 15? Oh no, the other question, yes. They asked, Father, what do I do with a broken rosary? And that's an excellent question. That comes up a lot. And so if we have any sort of object like a crucifix or a rosary, or even a scapular that breaks, or even a medal that's all worn out or keeps falling off the chain, what do you do with it? And instantly I just said, bury it right outside of your house next to the foundation. That's what exterminators do. They put poison there to keep the little critters, the termites and the cockroaches from coming into your house. So it's a blessed object. So just take a little shovel or a little trowel and just put the broken rosary or the worn out medal or the broken scapular there and bury it. And now you have a sacred thing outside the foundation of your house. And so, yes, we can bless the inside of our houses, but we don't throw things like that in the trash or in the garbage. The gospel today, we hear the wisdom of Jesus, how he confounded those that were trying to set a trap for. We first hear that they ask him an impossible question. No matter what he says, it's going to be a wrong answer. And so first they flatter him and they butter him up like a muffin, and they say all these nice things about him. Then they say, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not? Now we must remember that the Roman Empire was a dominating force on the Jews in Israel. And so they came in as outsiders, and then they just absorbed them as part of the empire, and they were asking these exorbitant taxes upon the Jewish citizens. So if Jesus says, no, it's not lawful to do that, they would turn him into the Roman authorities for insurrection, telling people not to pay their taxes. If he says, yes, you should pay your taxes, then they're going to turn him over to the Pharisees and the Jewish authorities, because they're going to say he's in cahoots with this foreign power. And so he uses his wisdom as God and says, show me the coin that pays the tax. And they bring him a Roman denarius, and then he says, whose picture is that? And they say, Caesar's. Whose inscription? Caesar's. It's like a little kid with a lunchbox. If it says Trevor, then that lunchbox must belong to Trevor and not to Tracy. And so he says, well, then give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but give to God what belongs to God. And with that, they were confounded and went away in silence. There is an error, though, thinking that we must have such separation of our civic responsibilities to do what we're supposed to do as citizens of our city, of our state, and of our country, and also of our faith. We see that God has intimately always been involved in the governance of his people, not just in the church or the hierarchy of the church or in the days of Israel, but rather with the governance of countries. And we see that he chose in the first reading from the book of Isaiah. Remember, Isaiah encompasses many centuries before the Babylonian exile, during the exile, and afterwards. So Israel, when reading the Old Testament, they had this tendency to always follow the false gods of the land. God gave them the commandments, and they would do good for a while. Then they would fall off the wagon and do very sinful things as what the pagans were doing. And then they would cry out for help, and then God would send them help. When we see the book of Judges, he would always raise up a charismatic figure to be able to rescue Israel. And it was always a Jew. Remember when the Jews were in slavery in Egypt, he raised up Moses as an 80-year-old man to show that it is God's power that leads us always. And he would raise up King David to be the second king succeeding Saul. And we see that there was always good kings and there was bad kings, but if the hand of God was on a particular person, he would go on to do tremendous things. And so when Israel fell off the wagon yet again, God allowed them to suffer the ultimate indignation. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. And so the temple that was built by Solomon, the son of King David, was leveled to the ground. And the Jews were deported to a foreign country, to Babylon, for 40 years. And they didn't have access to their synagogues, their scrolls. And so the parents had to teach from memory the scriptures and the faith and the commandments to their children. And then finally, when they were brought back to Israel and restored, and they would build the second temple, it was not someone of their own race and culture that was chosen, but rather Cyrus, who was a Persian, one who was uncircumcised. He was not a Jew, but he was the one that God chose. He says, to his anointed one, his chosen one, Cyrus, whose right hand I grasp, subduing nations before him and making kings run in his service. And so in this year of election, we must, yes, do our sacred duty as citizens to give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. We all must vote. If you're a younger adult, 18, 19, 20, and you've never voted before, you're not registered, please register to vote. No one can sit this one out. It is too important. And so we must do our part as citizens, but also we must do our part as Christians to give to God what belongs to God, but to pray about things like this. Who is the candidate that God would most want to lead us as a nation? We cannot separate or divorce our faith from the decisions that we make, even in the civic arena. Now, in our great country, we do have something about the separation of church and state, and what that means is that the government cannot force upon the people a particular religion, and that is a good thing, because that happens in so many other countries. Be of this religion or be put to the sword. That's what the early martyrs did in the very beginning of the church. They were told to sacrifice to the Roman gods or the Greek gods, and they refused. They say, we honor one sacrifice, and that is the sacrifice of the Lamb of God on the cross of Calvary, and they would not serve. And so for the first 300 years, the Catholic Church, the Christian faith, had to literally celebrate Mass and their faith underground in the catacombs, because even the pagan Roman soldiers knew that that's bad juju to go in there and to try to grab somebody out while they're saying Mass in a cemetery. It wasn't until a pagan emperor, Constantine, was the one that was chosen by God. He had this vision of a cross, and he had this radical conversion and legitimized the Catholic faith in the Roman Empire, and then it allowed it to flourish and spread everywhere. So God always uses people in the secular realm to govern us. And so we must do our responsibilities, we must pay our taxes, but we don't say, well, these things, taking care of the poor, that's just for the government. That's always been what the Catholic Church has done. The hospital system came from us. The school system, educating children and others in education, that came from us. Oh yes, the rich always had access, wealthier families had access to education and health care, but not on a social level. That came from the church. And then once governments found out, hey, we can make money off of this, then the church kind of got out of that and got squeezed out of that in a lot of things. And so we must give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but give to God what belongs to God. We belong to God. And so when things like a government will say a certain thing, if we want to see, for example, the end to the scourge of abortion in our world, in our great nation, we cannot just rely on legislators or politicians for that. We must do our part and honor and respect the life that God sends into the world. And so when we see a pregnant woman, we need to revere her as we would a tabernacle. Because someone in the 21st century, in 2020, that chooses to bear life, no matter what their situation is, we must support her in that child that she's carrying now. Because maybe she'll determine, I don't want to have the next child. And so if we're in a checkout line, and if you see like a struggling mother, she has little kids, and you see that she's pregnant, maybe consider paying for groceries, just telling the clerk whatever she's got, I'll get too. But just to reach out and to help others, to just give them hope, to let them know that others care about them. Because why would somebody have to leave their job because they don't have health insurance, and to give birth, which, as you know, is very expensive, and to raise a child in this culture is extremely expensive? It'd be all too easy to listen to the voice of the world and say, you don't have to go through with this. But if the people of God in mass get together and start to do our part, to see Jesus in absolutely every person, then we won't have to worry about the exploitation of others or minorities. And so the church, Catholic, means universal, and God is in control of everything. And so before we vote in any time or culture, we must always pray, and not just have preconceived notions, not just go according to our opinions, but what are the more important things? When you look at world history and history of the church, we see that other countries had an opportunity. They could have seen bad things coming in a certain political regime, but maybe out of being timid or out of fear, they chose to do nothing. Some were actually silenced. We must remember in the 20th century, there was more martyrs for the Christian faith than all the other 19 centuries combined. And a lot of places like in Africa, in China, where people realized that my faith is too important. I would rather die for my faith than reject my faith. It's interesting that we have no shortage in our country of heroic men and women that will willingly lay down their lives for an invisible concept, freedom, liberty, or to protect and serve others. Our military do it on a daily basis. Our law enforcement does it on a daily basis. And so they're showing us that they are willing to lay down their lives physically, if need be, for a concept that they can't see. So why do we no longer have that spirit to lay down our lives in self-sacrifice for our faith, for a God that we can't see physically, but in a sense we can in each and every of our brothers and sisters who are all in the imago Dei, in the image and likeness of God? It's interesting that many people will leave the Catholic Church each year for whatever reason, maybe for some very serious reasons, but many times it's just for the most silliest of reasons. Oh, I didn't like what Father so-and-so did, or this and that, or I felt snubbed by the church in this regard, or something like that. But interestingly, not many people at all would ever switch their allegiance. Someone that might root for the Ohio State Buckeyes isn't one day all of a sudden going to don a blue sweatshirt with a big M in the middle of it. I'm not going to say the M word. I learned not to do that. Michigan. But people will be loyal to their sports teams till death. They can be like Northwestern, not win a game. What was it, like over 54? They had a 54-game losing streak, or maybe more than that, until they finally started winning again. Nobody burnt their Northwestern jerseys. They just said, well, our day will one day come. And so people have greater allegiance to their sports teams and even to their country. No matter how bad things get, we're not going to move out of America. We're not going to go somewhere else. But our ancestors did a long time ago. And it was usually because of persecution. They couldn't practice their faith in Europe, which used to be extremely Catholic, extremely Christian. They felt that they didn't have an opportunity in their own culture. And so they sailed across that ocean and came here. Some were physically brought by force against their will to come here. But that's what makes this country so great, that we are a melting pot. We are truly Catholic in the sense of being universal. And so if we hear in the first reading how God used an unlikely person, a foreigner, Cyrus, a Persian, and they were enemies of the Jewish people. And how many times does Jesus give parables involving Samaritans, people that the Jews thought to be unclean, but God sees them differently. They are clean. They're in my image and likeness, says the Lord. And so God is very interested in the things of our world, about upcoming elections on the local or national level. And it's interesting about how will the end times come about. There was a book written at the beginning of the 20th century called The Lord of the World, and I'm still reading, I'm not done with it. But what piqued my interest about that is how a convert to the faith said what a powerful book it was. It's about how the Antichrist can come into the world. And Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, who aren't necessarily always singing out of the same hymnal, both agreed on that as what a significant book that is. I'm not saying go out and read it, but one of the premises is the Antichrist comes in to the world and he's so attractive. And he was 33 years old. And he doesn't run for office. People in France say, we'll make you president today. He turns it down. People in Italy, we'll make you king today. Turns it down. And England was the holdout. They didn't do it because the author was from England. But all of these other countries that wanted to have this particular individual as the leader of their country, he turned them down. He wanted the whole shebang-a-bang. And then when all of Europe and all of the world says, we want you to be our leader, and they forgot about God. They forgot about their Christian roots, and they just opened the door to destruction. And so we can't have this attitude that there's a separation between Caesar and God. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Pay your taxes. Don't try to cheat them. If you get paid extra income, don't say, well, that's under the table, the government, I don't want them touching my money. Because our troops still need it for water, for medicine, for first aid supplies, for those aid stations. When a bomb goes up and our brothers and sisters are out there at ground zero, they need treatment and that costs money. So we don't cheat on our taxes. We give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But we must give to God what belongs to God. Our faith, our hands, our ears, and our mouths. They're not ours. They belong to God. And so if we can just live that adage and pray before we vote, and not just use our opinions, but God, who is the most unlikely one that you are calling? Remember, Christianity wouldn't be what it is today without the conversion of Saul of Tarsus. He was putting Christians to their death, and he had this radical conversion. And the first writings of the New Testament are from Paul. And he intercedes for us still. And so we must integrate. We must be men and women of integrity. We cannot have a private spiritual life and then a different public life. They must be two sides of the same coin. And we at our baptism are marked in the image of God. More than ever, the world needs us as Christians to stand up, recognize Christ, particularly in the vulnerable, and don't wait for governments to tend to them. Let us be the one to tend to the needs of those who cry to the living God.